Welcome to Wall Estate's first virtual career fair. This workshop is going to be about interviewing and interview skills, and we're hoping that you get a lot from this. Feel free to have some questions ready, which we'll answer at the end. So, you got the job, you got the interview, and you're headed in. And the first thing that I feel like I always end up addressing with students is the anxiety issue. A lot of people have a lot of anxiety these days. Um, it can be a real challenge to walk into a new situation that you've never been into before, new people. So I completely understand. So the first thing I'm going to offer you is on the worksheet, I put some links to a few resources for you that kind of talk about anxiety and some things you can do to help. Um, my background is I'm a mental health therapist. So my experience with anxiety has been this. Anxiety is very individual. What triggers it, how it manifests, it really depends on you. And so you'll have to look at your anxiety as sort of a problem to solve. What things trigger it? What things help it? And kind of going through all these resources and just trying each one on and seeing what works for you. I can tell you, for me, some of the things that I do to minimize my interview anxiety are I don't drink caffeine before my interview. I also schedule an interview time if I'm given an option for kind of my peak time of the day. So, like 9 to 11 a.m. is a good time for me if I have an option. Um, I get there an hour early. I know that sounds really early. I don't walk in, I sit in my car and I wait. That gives me some time to know that I'm there, to kind of get grounded, to get present, to just relax a little bit before the interview starts. I also drive to the interview location the day before, so I know where it is. Some people feel like that's too much, but it makes me feel a lot better. Other things that I do, I don't do social media the day of the interview. For some reason, there's something about scrolling through Facebook or Instagram that is really triggering for me. So that's one thing I just don't do on interview days. I also try to wear comfortable clothes, professional but comfortable. I practice walking in the shoes that I'm wearing. And when I get into the interview, I very consciously feel myself in the chair. I look around the room to make sure that I know, you know, where windows and doors are. Things just make me a little more comfortable when I come into a new place. I'm also a big fan of taking a deep breath before I answer any questions. So, those are just a few things that work for me. You might find different things work for you. I know some folks use aromatherapy before they go into interviews. Some people carry like a small piece of clay or something that they can fidget with that isn't like obvious. What are some other things I've heard? Um, of course, practicing interview questions beforehand, whatever makes you feel good, whatever makes you feel safe and comfortable. It's really challenging to perform at your best when you're feeling kind of overwhelmed by anxiety. So, we'll talk a little more about the end if you have any more thoughts or comments on that. Okay, so let's talk about what to wear. So I included a link on that worksheet with some suggestions about attire. The rule of thumb generally is you want to dress one or two notches above the daily attire at the place that you're working. So, for example, here people generally wear business casual. And so when I came to the interview, I wore a blazer, a pencil skirt, and boots. If you're interviewing for a job at like a restaurant or in construction, khaki pants and a polo is sufficient. When in doubt, you can always call the front desk and ask, what's the general attire requirements at this location. Um, Also, you can always fall back on business attire anytime. So for ladies, that's going to be either slacks or a skirt. You want to make sure, obviously, that it's a long enough skirt, so it needs to cover your knees when you're seated. Um, Low heels or boots, a blazer, and a dress shirt tucked in. For gentlemen, it's going to be a blazer, khaki pants, loafers, and again, a collared shirt tucked in. Make sure that it's stuff you're comfortable wearing. So, like most people, I only have one interview outfit. And so I wanted to make sure that I try it on beforehand because, sometimes your weight can fluctuate. You want to make sure that it fits well, it's not too loose, it's not too tight, it's not too revealing. And you want to be sure that it's something you feel good about. You want to feel confident in it. For just general advice, you want to make sure that your grooming is up to par. Teeth clean, hair cut, beards trimmed. For ladies, if you do wear makeup, you want to be sure that it's, tasteful, kind of low key. You want the focus to be on your skills, not on what you're wearing. So, some other tips and tricks around that are jewelry. So I always take my jewelry and really notch it down. So I don't wear my engagement ring. I just wear a plain band. I wear, as you can see, I'm from Seattle, so I have stretched ears. I make sure those are covered. I take my piercings out. Again, you want the focus to be on your skill set, on what a great fit you are for the company. You don't want them kind of fixating on, your jewelry or the way you're dressed. Same thing goes with tattoos. You want to be sure that you cover those as much as possible. No crazy hair dye, of course. I always like to pull my hair back so that people can see my face. Just think like, what can you wear to impress? What can you wear that looks professional? You don't want to eat before you go in, chew gum. Don't carry something to drink. Make sure your clothing's in good repair. Gentlemen, no distracting ties. These are kind of sounds like common sense, but they're definitely ways that you can, definitely Google it. Look and see what outfits come up for good professional attire. That's a great way to start if you're not sure where to begin. Okay, so when you arrive, you want to be there at least 15 minutes early, but don't walk into the building earlier than 15 minutes. If you're there a half an hour early, they're not going to know what to do with you. So try to be there at 15 minutes early. Be sure that you have a couple of copies of your resume ready. Have all of your needs met. Don't go in hungry, thirsty, tired, needing to go to the bathroom. When you walk in and you introduce yourself, make sure you introduce yourself to each person in the room. You make eye contact. And with COVID, you really have to kind of read the room on the handshake situation. So it used to be, a nice, firm, business-like handshake. But what I would do is just watch to see if someone reaches. If they reach for you and you're comfortable, shake their hand. If not, you can offer an alternative or, smile and say, I'm trying to be mindful of COVID. Thank you so much. People understand that it's an awkward situation and it's a new situation and everyone's trying to navigate it. That's probably the biggest secret about interviews that I can offer you. It's an awkward situation for everyone. The interviewer is pretty nervous too. No matter how many times you do it, it's still a situation where you're meeting someone new and you're asking them a lot of questions, and everyone's kind of in a position where they're analyzing everyone else. So know that you're not the only nervous person in the room. All right, so once you're there and you've shaken everyone's hand, I always wait until I'm told to sit before I sit. That's something I learned in the Navy, and it has served me really well in interviews, and people like it. It shows deference and respect. Common interview questions. Let's talk about those. So I gave you a list on the worksheet, and I've been doing a lot of mock interviews with students, and I want to talk about some things that can be a bit of a trip up. The first thing that's a common trip up is the elevator pitch. You're generally going to be asked to tell them about yourself and why you're applying for the job. You need to have a really succinct elevator pitch ready for this situation. And I gave you some notes on that, and we'll talk about that a little more in the end. But be sure that you have that pitch ready to go and that you've practiced it enough so that it doesn't feel awkward coming off of your tongue. When they ask about professional strengths, you want to give them more than one, and you want to give them a little bit of details. So for example, I might say, one of my professional strengths is that I'm passionate about continuing education. I'm always learning something new. I like to, I have an active reading list, and I listen to a couple of different podcasts. You see where I'm going? You give them just a little bit of information. You don't want to go on and on and on. Okay, so three strengths is fine, a few details, and then end. That's an important part of interviewing. So there's gonna be silence. And I know that's awkward, and there's a tendency to really want to fill that silence, right? Try to resist the urge. Practice that with a friend if you need to. Have them ask you a question and then be silent. They're waiting to see if you're going to add more. Just give your succinct answer and be done. Okay. So professional weaknesses. 1. Even though they say weaknesses, you're just going to give 1. If they press, you can give another. I only prepare for 1, and I've never been asked to give more. Make sure it's not something that is critical to the job. So a bad one to use would be like, I'm disorganized. If you're applying for a job, like say in an office, and you say, I don't have very good attention to detail. Those are really rough ones to use. But you also want to use something that's authentic. So coming in and saying something like, oh, I work too hard, or I can't say no, those things don't feel very genuine. So talk to people who've worked with you, talk to your family, talk to your friends, and say, can you give me some ideas on what my weaknesses are? And then once you've figured out which ones you're going to use, don't just tell them the weakness, talk about how you're working on it. So for example, the one I use for myself, I say, I love people and I talk a lot, and sometimes I can get really off the point just because I enjoy talking to people. And so when I go into conversations, I'm working on asking myself what the purpose is before I go into the conversation. That way you're showing that you're aware of it and you're working on it. Have a plan. Let's talk a little bit about behavioral questions. These are pretty common too. A behavioral question is a question where they want a story. The most common one is, tell me about a time you had a conflict with, or tell me about a time that you were assigned a project and you succeeded, or a time you were part of a team. Behavioral questions are story questions, and they're looking for you to say something with a clear start, beginning, and end, and they're looking for you to talk about your contribution. So sometimes folks will tell me a story about a difficult customer that they had, but they won't tell me how they worked with that customer. Be sure that you have kind of some of these ready to go and have practiced them. So again, the most common one's going to be, tell me about a difficult conflict. Have have a story about a time that you had a project that you succeeded or that you were part of a team and you contributed to that team. Those are pretty standard questions, and really not unexpected. Places like Boeing and Amazon, um, Microsoft, you can Google specifically which questions they use, and those are actually out there on the internet. So that's a really helpful resource. Um, let's see. When they ask personal questions, like what would we find out about you if we were to look at your social media? Personal questions, you want to be really short and succinct without being terse. So, for example, if someone were to ask me about my social media, I'd say, I don't really post very often, but you might see from my posts that I'm really passionate about social justice and publishing. You don't want to talk about personal things because you don't want them to be moving into this area where they start to like make up stories about who you are, right? It's kind of human nature. You see someone and you think, well, that's the kind of person who does this, or that's the kind of person who does that. You want to really minimize that and make sure that they're focused on you and your skills. Okay. The other thing that I've noticed that folks here seem to have some trouble with, students, is selling yourself. They might ask you a question about, why are you the best person for the job? I know this is a tough one, and I know it's hard to talk about your skills and it can feel a little awkward. So you might have to practice it a little bit, but you have skills. You may not feel like it. And if you have to, ask your friends, ask your family, ask your professors, what are my skills? What are my strengths? You have them, and it's okay to say that you have them. It's really just about how you phrase it, right? So, for example, I am really, really passionate about personal growth. I read a lot of books on it. I spend a lot of time with my friends and family, like helping them grow because I love seeing people be the best that they can be, right? You can talk about your strengths, personal growth, without saying things like, well, I'm the best at personal growth. You know what I mean? There's a difference there. So practice, figure out what makes you comfortable and be able to say that. Be able to say why they should hire you. If you don't know why they should hire you, then they're not going to know why they should hire you, right? So that's something that just takes practice. The last thing around common interview questions is really important. They're going to ask you if you have any questions for them. Always, always, always have questions for the employer. Be sure that you've researched them beforehand. Maybe you can ask them a question about, a product that they're making or a service that they're offering. Some of my favorite questions are, what are your expectations of me in the first 30 days of employment? That's a good one. Another really good question is, say I'm applying to be an X-ray tech. I could say, what skills do your best X-ray techs have? That's another really good question. You don't want to ask anything about pay, hours, benefits, or anything that you can Google. So don't go in and say, tell me about your mission statement. That's something you can find on the internet. Speaking of mission statement, another trick that I use in interviews that has really fared me well is I look up the values of the company I'm applying for. For example, Wallace State has the values of community, continuing education, and growth, right? And so when I went into the interview and they said, why should we hire you? I said, well, your top 3 values also happen to be 3 of my top values. Now, this has to be authentic. I would also argue if their values don't line up in any way with yours, that you might want to reconsider applying there in the first place, right? It's really helpful when who you are aligns with who they are. So that's a little trick. Another little trick that I use is I always bring notes. I bring my full notebook, And I take common interview questions and I write little bulleted answers. So in case I get nervous and forget, I can just look at my sheet and go, oh, my strengths, these are the 3 I wanted to use. It's totally okay to bring notes. You definitely want to be sure that you don't forget anything important. Okay. You want to frame everything as positively as possible. So even if they ask about, say, another job that didn't work out very well, try to frame it in an upbeat sort of way. So you can always say, I learned a lot from that experience. That's kind of my code for I had a hard time at that job. You never want to talk bad about anyone else. You don't want to assume that everyone in the room feels the same way that you do. I'm trying to think of some other common slips. I think those are kind of the main ones I hear a lot. This is one. Don't soften your statements. I love and admire the humility that people bring into the room. But when you have a skill, you want to say, I have that skill. Not I kind of have that skill, or I sort of have that skill, or I've heard I'm a little. Nope. Go ahead and just say the thing that you do or you have or that you're good at and leave it at that. It's called couching. And it always makes me cringe a little bit because it seems like I know people are trying to come across as humble, but it seems like they're not sure that they actually have the skill. So practice being comfortable saying, I'm good at this. I'm great at this. This is where I want to grow. This is what I want, etc. Does that make sense? That can be kind of a hard one. Okay. Don't fidget. This is a tough one. This is where having something in your hands can help. Sometimes I'll see students like tap their knee, and that's okay. But the swinging in the chair, the sprawling out, those are all things you really want to avoid. You want to just sit up straight with your feet flat on the floor and try not to jiggle around too much. And if you catch yourself doing it, you can make a joke. My interview with the president here, I said, oh my gosh, I'm really nervous right now. It's all right to acknowledge that. They understand that that's the elephant in the room, right? So if you catch yourself doing something you wouldn't normally do, go ahead and just acknowledge it. And it's the same thing with your answering questions and you say something you don't mean to, you can always say, give me 1 second, let me start over. I don't think I like where I was going with that. Remember, there's human beings in the room. You can be a human being too. You don't have to be perfect. It's okay to make a mistake. Just be sure that you stop, acknowledge it, and carry on. Make good eye contact. This is something you can practice at home. Make sure that you get everyone's name in the room and how to spell it. You're going to need that for your thank you note. Okay. One of the things I like to do is collect everyone's card if they have it, or I just am sure to ask before I leave. Okay. That's the main bulk of the interview portion. I think I covered most of the basic stuff there. And again, if you have any questions afterwards, we can talk about it. The elevator pitch. Okay. This is the tough one, but I have the secret recipe for you. So this will make it a lot easier. And I use this for more than just an elevator pitch in resumes or in interviews. I use it for a lot of things. So when you're trying to get that elevator pitch out, you want to start with what you want, where you're going, and then you're going to give some backstory. And then you're going to go back to what you want, because somehow people always forget by the time you're done with your backstory. You want to keep it really short. Okay, so here is an example. Let me come up with something here. Say you're a nursing student and you're applying for a nursing position, and you could say, My name is Jamie Newman, and I'm applying to become a nurse here at UAB Medical Center. When I was a little girl, my grandmother was very sick, and I spent a lot of time in the hospital, and I saw what a huge difference the nurses made for her and her comfort and her care. And I just knew that that's what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so I'm here applying to be a nurse at your really prestigious medical center. You see? And I do that with everything. You're talking to your boss and you say, hey, can we use this spreadsheet at work? I feel really disorganized and I'm having a hard time keeping track of everything. So I created this awesome spreadsheet that I think would be really helpful. Can we use it? Does that make sense? It's kind of a fun thing to play with, and we'll play with it a little bit after this. I'll have you like try out some silly examples like the wet towels on the floor. Anything, to practice it really, really helps to kind of smooth things out. So by the time you get to the interview, you're comfortable and you're ready. All right, so that is kind of the lecture portion, and I'm gonna stop the video. I appreciate you listening through all of that, and I'm gonna give you a chance to ask questions, okay?